Why GPT-3?
It's great at kind of pattern recognition of any kind. What you're going to be training is just like a smaller model that sits on top. Even if coding looks completely different in 5-10 years.
Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Sandra. Today I want to share with you the conversation I had with Piotr Grudzień, the co-founder of Quickchat AI. If you follow me on the channel for a while, you might have seen my review of Quickchat AI Chatbot, which should appear here. I will also include the link in the description box down below so you can check it out. While I was reviewing Quickchat AI, I happened to have lots of questions. And so I am very happy that I had the opportunity to talk to Piotr and ask him to invite me behind the scenes of Quickchat. His initial journey with GPT-3, attempts to incorporate it into existing product, and many things related, such as where AI will be in 5 years from now, or what the future of work might look like considering awesome GPT-3 capabilities. So I'm super excited to share it with you. By the way, if you happen to like that type of content, hit the subscribe button below. I release videos every week, so stay with us. Alright, so without further ado, let's do this. Thank you so much for joining me today, Piotr. I'm very excited to learn about Quickchat, about how your process with approaching OpenAI, receiving GPT-3, and then playing with it to then implement it into your product worked. People that are watching the channel are very interested in especially GPT-3 as one of the most cutting-edge algorithms out there. For me, it's a super cool opportunity to talk to somebody that had the opportunity to touch it with their own hands, so to speak, and build something upon it. Why GPT-3 in the first place? What brought you there?
So I've been working in machine learning all my life since university, and I've been following OpenAI very closely for many years. And obviously I was aware of like GPT-2 and their previous projects. And yeah, GPT-2 was very exciting, but it was pretty clear that back then it's just a toy. So there were these blog posts by Andrzej Karpathy who would be showing like GPT-2 generating like math proofs or generating like jokes, but then you would kind of need to like look very closely to find a bit that makes sense, but the whole of it was kind of
Random.
And then when GPT-3 came out, first it was the paper, then like I could tell that this is something completely different based on like how excited some people inside the community got. And then obviously all the demos started coming out, and you could see that like this is the real thing. And then I managed to get access quite early on, and I could finally really try it for myself to see, you know, how cherry-picked those demos and those examples are.
So just to jump into it, did you have any favorite demo that you saw that like inspired you to actually try it for yourself, or it was this overall variety of potential use cases that was so like striking to you?
Initially, it was like a lot of it was kind of literature based. So you'd have it like write poems, or you'd have it, I don't know, generate a dialogue between like Plato and some modern politician, for example. And I was amazed how coherent it was, but also by how it was able to take some very specific knowledge that it had and apply it to a task of get Socrates to describe current political agenda or whatever. And that was super impressive. And I immediately started to think of like, what are the really innovative things you could do using software like that.
The crazy thing is that it's actually, first of all, it's able to acquire all the possible knowledge in the world that is written, and then use it in particular context, right? So it understands both the context and can like build on the top of the knowledge. Because being able to generate a sentence that Socrates would say, first of all, you need to understand what kind of discourse he was having, and then somehow adjust it to the context that is the one that you want to actually use, which is what humans do actually. So yeah, it's a crazy one. Okay, so then you applied and you got it. And what happened next? So
when I first got access, I remember that was during the lockdown in Poland, where I would spend some evenings kind of playing with, just talking to the AI on the playground.
Playground, for those who do not know, is like the interface with which you can interact.
Yeah, exactly. So GPT-3 is a language model. So what you do is like you give it some text, and then it gives you text back, or actually it kind of continues on from what you said. And then Playground is just a UI that looks kind of like a simple web page. That
was built by OpenAI for everybody to just try it out for many different purposes.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so a good first step is to just chat to the AI and see what it does. And it takes some practice to like get it to do interesting things, but once you understand it, then it doesn't take too long for you to kind of be amazed by what it's capable of doing. So my first instinct was to see kind of how good it is at speaking Polish, or how much it knows about like obscure facts in like Polish history or politics. And it's just really, really good at all of it. It can easily switch between languages, contexts, styles, and obviously it's great at kind of pattern recognition of any kind. So that's why people make a lot of demos of it, writing code in different programming languages or translating from one programming language to another one. And that's what I found really inspiring. That's what inspired a lot of what we do at Quickchat, which is to treat those language models as kind of these general purpose translators for different encoding, different patterns. And this whole idea of translating natural language into code that machine understands, that's a really powerful one.
So then you set out to use GPT-3 in Quickchat itself, and this is the project that you've been working on for quite some time, right? I had an opportunity to test Quickchat, and especially the chatbot that you released as your own chatbot for the website. And I think I encountered chatbot that was the first iteration that you released. And the striking feature was that it was very careful not to go overboard to talk about other subjects. And this is something that also you can find in other bots that are less smart in terms of language, in terms of conversation. So I was first of all curious why that was the case. Then I was speaking to Dominic, your co-founder, for those who don't know, and he explained to me that the purpose is to make sure that GPT-3 does not do anything controversial or does not generate any unnecessary content that would, I don't know, even hurt this individual that it engages with, right? Tell me, how did you build that so that it sticks so much to the subject matter? Because I gather it can be quite challenging since it's so like versatile and it has so much data that it already has analyzed, right? So it has like this huge corpus, the whole internet basically at its fingertips. How did you do that?
Yeah, so when you compare what we do with chatbots that are live these days, it's like the diametric opposite of that. So chatbots today, they know nothing outside of the specific scenarios that were built from them. So you have software where you literally build trees of different intents and responses, and the chatbot can only really traverse those trees. And when something that the user says goes outside of one of those scenarios, then it's just completely lost, right? Which means that you get a chatbot which is like really good at following the exact path you set for it, but it won't do anything outside of that, which in practice means that they're just not very useful because they're kind of constantly confused. You use a different word and something that you don't recognize, and it's kind of over because you're off the script. Using a huge language model like GPT-3, it's like the opposite. So they are able to answer to absolutely anything, right? And they know all of internet kind of by heart, and there are no limits, which means that if they're provoked, they can say things that are potentially, dangerous or can be misunderstood, misused, and so on. So our big task was to kind of build technology around GPT-3 to kind of box it, to limit it to a specific use case that we set out to develop, but at the same time to not kill its creativity. And that's obviously not easy because language is this very, very kind of highly dimensional data structure. Language is not like you can say, don't say anything that is inappropriate at more than 7 out of 10. Like there's no single dimension which measures what appropriate means, right? Or even what like subject means. You can talk about the same thing in a huge number of ways. So that's why we literally kind of, using our experience doing different machine learning projects, we essentially built a number of filters and other mechanisms on top of.
So if you could tell, what are these filters? Are they other algorithms catching outputs that you potentially consider unnecessary in the context that somebody is interacting with the chatbot?
Yeah, so to put it in like a machine learning framework, every interaction is the user says something. So we have text input. This input potentially goes into the OpenAI API, and then what comes back is a response. And this response could potentially be delivered to the user. And then, so we want to make two decisions. One is, given this user input, do we want to kind of proceed and try and answer? And then when we get the response back from OpenAI, do we want to deliver it to the user? And that's literally kind of a binary classifier task where you want to say yes or no, and if no, then provide some like fallback answer or block it or similar. And we essentially develop models which try and predict whether it's safe to say a certain thing or not. And obviously this is kind of machine learning. So you never be perfect, but you want to measure and try to predict what your kind of false positives and false negatives are going to look like and find where on the operating curve you want to be. So let's say, and you mentioned our first model. So our first model was kind of very, very conservative. So our filter would say, okay, I'm going to be willing to risk a lot of false positives, but I'm really scared of false negatives, right? That's why very often it would kind of refuse to answer.
Even to an emoji.
Even to an emoji, yeah.
Let's provoke it with an emoji and see what happens. What do you mean exactly? Could you please try again?
So it's not because it's not smart enough, it's because it's really scared.
You notified me that you released the next version a few days afterwards, and I had the chance to try it out before our meeting because I wanted to see how much more flexible it got, kinda, how much more relaxed as a conversation partner. And I did find it more relaxed, definitely. It was more playful, I would say. When it comes to the tone of voice, it used more emojis, definitely. So all these touches that make it kind of more enjoyable to talk with. At the same time, it was still leading me back to the conversation. So what changed?
A lot has changed. Based on the data that we gathered testing it, we kind of reworked the whole architecture, and without going too much into detail, we sort of gave it way more freedom to be creative, but we found a way to box this creativity. So we now have mechanisms to kind of recognize where in the flow of the conversations we are. So like what it is that the user kind of requested or wanted. And now that we know for sure, or well, we hope that we know for sure what it is that user wants, then we say, okay, so within that realm, let the model kind of be a bit more creative, maybe a bit more funny sometimes, maybe a bit more, let it leak a bit more knowledge that is outside of the very specific topic, which in this case is a chatbot that talks about our chatbots, our product. It's still restricted. It's still not going to tell you what the weather is. Again, not because maybe it doesn't know that particular one, but it's kind of a feature, not a bug, right? It's supposed to talk about one thing only, and that's the purpose.
Could you tell me a little bit more about your interaction with OpenAI? How does that work? Do they, for example, reach out to you, or do you reach out to them and share the feedback that you've learned so far? Do you have any conversations like this?
Yeah, so OpenAI, I mean, first of all, I'm really impressed by how responsive they are, given that, well, as far as I know, it's a fairly small team, but then now they're handling this huge process of ensuring safety and providing access to all these people. So that's really impressive. So they let people be as creative as they want, while still ensuring that all the use cases are safe. So they have a well-established process of accepting or rejecting use cases based on how safe they are. And that, I think, is pretty well, first of all, pretty well documented, but also it works fine. And at the same time, they are really, really open to feedback. So it's great that you can have this relationship where you can just literally text them and tell them about something interesting that you found, because for them, it's all really, really useful feedback, because they treat their product like you should do, that it's kind of never finished, and they're constantly improving, constantly reworking their list of priorities of what to focus on right now, just to make the product great for the developers, who then kind of spread the word and get more and more people to use it.
And did you come up with any feedback so far for them, based on your reflections of working with it?
We definitely found a lot of things where we wish the model would maybe do something else, or we found some use cases that are tricky for the model, and they're always really interested in that.
It would be great if you could come with some example to illustrate.
There are some obvious bits that are characteristic of any generative text model, like being repetitive or like getting stuck in loops. So like what generative models tend to do sometimes is you'd ask it, what are your biggest competitors? And it would start listing companies, which is really impressive because it's very relevant, but then suddenly it would repeat one company that was mentioned before and kind of get stuck in this loop. And that's another fascinating thing about machine learning, is that, we build these models and then we observe them and they exhibit behaviors that we wouldn't expect, and we're not sure where they come from. So that's one thing you should be aware of. And then, then I think it's up to really us and people who implement GPT-3 and other models to make sure you can handle cases like that.
Working with the model so far, what would you say are the most interesting realizations that you have about this technology?
The way we think about use cases is there are two main types of uses. One is fairly obvious. It's like chatbots as we know them today, where it's like a little thing that sits in the bottom right corner of your website and it can answer questions, it can gather some information. It's this kind of assistant that we're familiar with, but these days they're just not very useful. So you could just take something that we all know and have used before and just improve it. So that's pretty...
And that's what you do currently?
That's what we do currently. But then the second aspect is probably more interesting, but also a bit less expected. And it's something that we learned from a lot of people who reached out to us with their own ideas for their own use cases. And this made us realize that I have this kind of conjecture that now following OpenAI, we're going to see a lot more huge machine learning models being made available to companies and startups in such a way that they will be trained once and maybe periodically updated and then made available over some API. And then what we end up with is a model which is really, really powerful. That is like very little it cannot do, but at the same time you need to build stuff on top of it to adjust it to a particular use case, to restrict it and so on. And then it could be text in, text out, or video in, sound out, and so on. There are many different possibilities there. But then there's going to be loads of people who build stuff on top of that. So you can think of it as like these different models are like the new microprocessors, and then people build operating systems on top of that, right? Because in order to, let's say, have a chatbot, then you need this architecture that can limit it, that can take some knowledge and feed it into the chatbot so that it's like this boilerplate at the bottom that you can start building your apps on top, right? And that's how we think about some of the projects that we're working on right now, is that we are going to be this layer between this super powerful AI technology that is very powerful but not quite ready to be productionized. And you can think of it as translating from natural language to what the machine can understand.
Okay, awesome. So in a way, your realization was that kind of the future of development will be significantly changed. The development of different products, that there will be more access to powerful technology, such as GPT-3, which is right now this shining star, but there will be more. And so probably with more access, we will be able to come up with more exciting use cases and so forth.
Yeah, I think this is one of the results, I think, of the deep learning hypothesis turning out to be true. So if we compare, let's say we want to build a system that can write code for you, right? One approach would be to gather training data that is very specific to that. So you would maybe have a bunch of people sit down and write pairs of like sentence and the equivalent bit of code, right? And then you would build this perfect data set and try a train model on that. But then it turns out that if instead you take a huge model and just shove a lot of data into it, and even if the data isn't really relevant, but it's just orders of magnitude more than what you could ever prepare by hand, then this compensates for it. And through that, you can build a model that performs better on that specific task and also does hundreds of other things. That's why we could see that we're going to have these huge companies that can afford and have the engineering and the expertise to build these huge models. And then smaller companies, they cannot really compete with that, but what they can do really well is to plug into this API and build a specialized technology that would make this model useful for end users, right?
That's amazing prospect.
Yeah, that's kind of what we do.
Yeah, that's amazing, because many people, even in the industry that are close to the subject matter, are worried that there will be a moment where these big companies that have lots of resources, lots of computing power in order to be able to build this powerful tech will at some point monopolize this technology, right? And just close the doors eventually and keep it to just gain more and more competitive advantage. But what you're saying is that they're more interested in opening it to a broader audience of companies so that at the top of this technology, some things can be built.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel, because so imagine you can build, let's say, 1,000 different businesses on top of a model like GPT-3, right? But then for each one of those businesses to succeed, you need some people to really dig into it and get the specific knowledge and experience that is needed to succeed in that small niche. And I don't think one organization can really branch out into that many small niches, but what they can do is to say, okay, this is the infrastructure, you guys figure it out and just pay us a percentage. And we kind of build this symbiotic environment and work together.
Awesome. That's a positive future
Hopefully.
to envision, hopefully. Speaking of the future, I wonder what's your intuition about 5 years from now? Where we will be? GPT-5, GPT-6, GPT-10?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I have this vision that, and we're kind of seeing it already, that other companies are gonna follow and start developing their own huge models, and we're gonna see more and more startups that treat machine learning models the way we treat cloud computing today. That it's like this commodity that is gonna be like, which ML model are you using? No one's gonna be training them in-house, or what you're gonna be training is just like a smaller model that sits on top of, but everyone's gonna be using this as their base layer.
In terms of Quickchat, so the way you think about its future, you will be building more and more products with the usage of different AI models, or how you're thinking about growing as a company?
For now, we're definitely focusing on working with particular customers and particular companies and delivering the solution to them, because that's kind of the best way to start, and that's how you best learn how you can apply the technology in the most efficient way.
And can I ask what kind of use cases there are at the moment that you prepared?
Yeah, so again, this comes back to this divide that I mentioned. So one use case is you have some website where you can do something, you can like apply for something, or you can purchase something. And then what people want, which I think is very natural, is to make this experience more natural. So to have a chatbot on there, a chatbot that is not kind of useless and annoying, but a chatbot that feels like a human being, right? So you can think of it as, you know, the internet looks the way it looks because of the technology requirements that we had back in the day, where we had first browsers and you had to, then people came up with buttons and lists and so on. But the natural way for us to interact is to have a conversation. Like you go to a shop and you talk to that person. And maybe we're going to see the internet move in that way. So we're going to have websites where you have fewer and fewer forms and buttons, but maybe there's going to be like an agent with an AI generated face, and you can just talk to them, and that's how you're going to book your flight, and that's how you're going to apply for something. So that's one set of use cases that we're working on right now. And the second one is what I mentioned before, is talking to companies and building this natural language interface between their non-technical stuff and their internal software infrastructure, let's say, right? So these days, very often you need this extra step of going from, I need this data and this request being written out in an email, to an actual query or an actual bit of code that goes into some software that's sometimes, you know, very old and difficult to use. And maybe we could just have a layer in between the internal systems and the human that would take care of the translation from I want this into something that the machine can understand.
I asked you this question before, but I'll do it again because I know that many people care about it and many people are potentially anxious about it. So with these algorithms being, with GPT-3, first of all, being so amazing at many different tasks and being able to interact both with humans and with code so well, do you see them replacing some potential employees of your company, for example, or not?
Yeah, obviously, tricky question. I usually go back to the argument from historical perspective that in general, with the progress of technology, lives have been getting better. I know that 2020 is a bit of an anomaly, but in general...
It's a tricky one, yeah.
Yeah, but in general, like life has never been as good as it is right now, as it is in 2019. And I believe technology is a huge factor in that. And, you know, some people frame it in a way that whenever new technology kills old jobs, it just creates a lot more new jobs that allows people to be more creative, to really use their human skills. But then it's the really mundane tasks that are being automated by machines. And that's the hope, that in the future, a lot of these very repetitive jobs that we hate are going to be automated, and people will be able to maybe spend less time working, but be more creative.
So if you were to give an advice to somebody that is wondering about that right now, given your experience so far with these models and projections of the future you have, what would that be? How can one prepare the best they can for what's going to happen?
For the job market of 2050?
Yeah, or 25.
I still think it's a good idea to learn to code for anyone, that's for sure. Even if coding looks completely different in 5-10 years, that skill and that way of thinking will definitely always help you. And I don't think coding is going away anytime soon. Maybe you're going to be coding different things. Maybe you're going to be coding in kind of natural language, the way we do with GPT-3. But even interacting with machines with natural language and coding things like chatbots on top of GPT-3 still requires a lot of what feels like coding. Yeah, so that I don't think is going away. But yeah, we're gonna see a lot of very exciting new jobs. We're gonna have AI testers that spend all day talking to machines and teaching them things or making sure that they work properly. Yeah, and that's gonna be pretty exciting. But it's really hard to tell because looking back, 5 years ago, the landscape of AI was completely different from what it is now, and it's only gonna accelerate. So nobody knows.
Yeah. Exciting though.
Very exciting.
Definitely is going to be exciting. That's one sure thing. Thank you so much for joining me today, and it was lovely to talk to you and learn more about what you do and your personal experience with GPT-3, and good luck with Quickchat and
Cool.
developing it more and more.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thank you.